They say it was near dusk when the little girl appeared, barefoot, cheeks windburned, dress torn from the ride. She didn't knock, just stood on the porch of a ranch that hadn't seen laughter in 9 years, and whispered four words, "Please help my mama." And for a man like Jonah Redden, who'd buried a wife and a child before his beard turned gray, those words hit like thunder across dry land. He hadn't meant to open the door, not to strangers, not to pain, but something about that child's eyes made the silence inside him shift. What he didn't know was that the woman lying unconscious in his wagon, fevered and fading, wasn't just a stranger. She was Hannah Whitlow, the woman he almost married 9 years ago. The woman he lost without ever understanding why. Why had she disappeared without goodbye? Why had she returned now broken and hiding with a child who looked just like the girl they once dreamed of having? And if time had been so cruel, could it now be kind? This is not just a story about second chances. It's about a man who gave up on love and a woman who never stopped hoping to be chosen, not for her beauty, not for her usefulness, but for the soft truth of who she was. It's about a child who bridged the gap between regret and redemption, in a house once haunted by grief, learning to echo with laughter again. So if you've ever lost someone you loved too soon, or wondered if it's ever too late to be truly seen, this story might just be for you. Because sometimes what we thought was gone forever is simply waiting on the porch. And what happens next will stay with you long after the fire dies low. The wind had a way of remembering things in Bridal Hollow, how it caught on the porch railings, how it stirred up the dust behind you like the past trying to follow. Jonah Coyle didn't look over his shoulder anymore. He'd stopped hoping the past might change its mind. He was a man who kept to the quiet. 51, son-worn twice, widowed, and long estranged from the idea that anything good might come knocking again. The ranch he worked was small and tired, a leftover piece of land no one wanted after the drought came through. But it was paid for, and that was enough. Jonah spent his days mending fences and feeding the chickens like they were old friends. He didn't ask for much, just that the sun rise steady, and that no one asked about her. Not the girl, not the storm, not the day the letter came 9 years ago. He kept her memory sealed like a letter he refused to open again. But even unopened letters weigh something. And then came the knock. It was soft, too soft for trouble. But when he opened the door, he found a girl no older than 10, hair tangled like a storm, cheeks red with dust. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She just looked up at him with wide eyes and whispered, "Help my mama." In her small hand, she held a slip of paper, folded, weather-worn. Jonah's hand shook when he took it. He unfolded it slow. And what he saw made him stagger because it was her handwriting, the woman he'd lost, the one who never said goodbye. What happened to her? And how did this child know his name? The wind was still when he saddled his horse. That was strange. Bridal Hollow rarely held its breath, but maybe the land like him was waiting to find out what had been left behind. Jonah rode with the child tucked gently in front of him. Her name was Clara June, and she held tight to the saddle horn, saying little, except when the trail curved too sharp or the wind picked up. Then she'd lean closer to him, whispering, "It's not far now." He studied her in silence, those dark, steady eyes, the same shade as someone he once knew better than he knew himself. She had Hannah's eyes. 9 years had passed since Hannah Devlin disappeared. 9 years since the letter arrived, unsigned, unexplained, and untraceable, saying she couldn't marry him after all. No reason, no return address. Just a single page folded tight as regret. He'd read that letter 1,000 times. But none of those reads prepared him for the farmhouse tucked beneath the ridgeline. A place no one had lived in since Old Man Clemens died. It sagged in the corners like a body too tired to stand, but smoke rose from the chimney. Clara June led him through the door, and there she was, Hannah. Older, thinner, her left arm cradled against her ribs like it had forgotten how to reach out. But her face hadn't forgotten him. She didn't cry. She just said hoarse and slow, "I didn't think you'd come." And Jonah, who hadn't wept in a decade, had to blink fast as the world tilted back into color. What made her leave all those years ago? And why now, after everything had she sent for him through a child? The house was quiet that night, save for the soft crackle of wood and the rasp in Hannah's breath. She'd fallen asleep sitting upright in the worn rocker, a knitted shawl slipping from her shoulder, a cup of untouched broth cooling by her side. Jonah sat across from her, elbows on knees, his old hat held between work-worn hands. He didn't ask the questions that clawed at him. Not yet. Outside, the prairie whispered like it always did when something buried was coming up for air. Clara June had curled up on a cot in the corner, her small hand resting over a folded letter, the same letter Hannah had written him 9 years ago, but never sent. When Jonah opened it earlier after Clara fell asleep, the words hadn't stung. They'd sunk slow and sorrowful like a stone into deep water. If he ever sees me like this, he'll feel sorry, and I'd rather disappear than be pitied. He hadn't pitied her. He had loved her. Still did, though the shape of it had changed. It had hollowed, then hardened, then softened again, like spring thaw. When Hannah stirred, her voice came like brittle paper. I wasn't sick back then, but I was. Not well. And when the fever came later, when I couldn't walk for weeks, I thought it was punishment for leaving. Jonah shook his head slowly, the fire painting his jawline gold. You think God punished you? Or that I would? She didn't answer, but her eyes, glossy with unshed years, looked at him like someone waiting to be forgiven by the very person they'd tried to protect. That night he slept on the floor beside her chair, not to guard, not out of duty, but simply because he couldn't leave her again, not even for a night. What pain had she carried alone all these years? And could he convince her that love, real love, didn't come with shame? By the time the sun crested over the ridge, Clara June was already outside with the hens, whispering things to them like they were old friends. The light hit her hair like it used to hit her mama's, a dusky copper, full of motion even when still. Hannah stood on the porch wrapped in the same shawl she once knitted while waiting for letters that never came. Her body still ached in places she didn't talk about. But that morning she stood tall, not strong, not healed, but upright. And when Jonah brought out coffee in 2 chip mugs, he didn't ask if she wanted to talk. He just handed her one and sat beside her, boots on the step like they'd done 100 years ago, when love was young and unspoiled. I ain't the girl you remembered, she said, tracing the rim of her cup. Good, Jonah said gently. I ain't the man I was either. She laughed once, quiet and low like a breath finally let go. And then her eyes welled not from sadness, but the kind of relief that only comes after holding your breath for years. You're not mad I left, Jonah shook his head. I was hurt. I was angry at the world. But not at you. I never hated you. I just missed you in every season. She stared ahead for a long while, then whispered, I thought you'd forget me. Darling, some folks you forget like dust on your coat. Others, he looked out across the prairie. Others stay like root in dry ground, waiting for rain. They sat like that for a while, just 2 people in their 50s, not trying to start over, just trying to start again where the wound had once been. When Clara June skipped over and plopped herself between them, leaning her head on Jonah's arm, like it was the most natural thing in the world, Hannah didn't pull away. She let her daughter rest there, and she let herself rest too. But what happens when the town finds out who Jonah's new guests really are? And what they once meant to him? They didn't mean to become talk of the town, but in a place like Winnow Creek, silence was a curtain. Folks couldn't wait to pull back. It started with whispers behind cracked saloon doors. That's her, ain't it? The one who ran off. Left him at the altar. 9 years back. And now she's got a kid, and he's letting her stay by week's end. The stares grew teeth. Hannah noticed it in the store when the butcher suddenly forgot her name, or when the preacher's wife turned the other way near the post. Even Clara June could feel it. Playmates pulled back, mamas whispered as they watched her walk by, like kindness might be something she'd catch. Jonah kept to the ranch as much as he could, fixed the fence 3 times though it didn't need fixing. And at night he'd sit by the fire, jaw clenched, eyes dark with the weight of everything unsaid. One evening, Hannah found him standing in the barn, gripping a beam like it might hold him up better than his own bones. They won't forget Jonah, she said softly. Don't need him to forget, he answered, but I do wish they'd leave us be. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. Maybe it was a mistake. Me coming back. He turned, jaw still tight, but his eyes, they were wet. You weren't the mistake, Hannah. Running was. Letting you think I didn't love you anymore. That was the real sin. The air between them thickened. Not with blame, but with something raw, years of unsaid truths finally rising like dust after drought. That night, Clara crawled into their bedroll on the floor, whispering, "Mom, if we have to leave again, I'll follow you anywhere." Hannah held her tight, but something in her heart whispered back, "Maybe this time we stay." But can love truly bloom where bitterness has rooted deep, and will Jonah choose the woman or the world that scorns her? The world had turned sharp around them. Even the wind in Winnow Creek seemed to whisper things they couldn't say aloud. But Jonah was tired of hiding in his own skin. That morning he hitched the wagon with firm, steady hands, cleaned his Sunday shirt, tugged on his good boots. Hannah watched him from the porch, Clara clinging to her skirt like a shadow. "You going somewhere?" she asked, voice cautious. "Yeah," he said. "I reckon it's time we stop letting other folks write our story." They rode into town together, not as ghosts or rumors, but as three beating hearts who'd endured too much to keep bending under the weight of judgment. At the general store, Jonah stood tall. "Folks been talking," he said, "so I'll give 'em something worth talking about." He turned to Hannah, his voice shaking, but not from fear. "You left once. You had your reasons, but I never stopped wanting you here. Not then. Not now." And before that town full of gasps and glares, he took her hand. Strong. "Sure, if you'll stay, we make this home." A hush swept through the dusty street. Then came the softest sound, Clara's giggle, full and free, like something had just been let go inside her. One woman clutched her pearls. Another dabbed her eyes. A child waved. And Hannah, after a lifetime of waiting, finally breathed in a moment that belonged to her. She didn't speak, just nodded. Because this wasn't about convincing the town. It was about choosing each other loudly, clearly, and without shame. But can a town built on silence truly hold space for a love that refuses to hide? And can Hannah forgive herself enough to begin again? Out loud, winter laid its quiet hand on Winnow Creek. Not cruel, just honest like time itself. Atop a modest hill, two crosses stood, one for Jonah's late wife and one for a daughter who never made it past her first breath. Jonah had come here every winter for 9 years. But this was the first time he didn't come alone. Hannah stood beside him, gloved hands cradling a basket of dried prairie flowers. Behind her, Clara, in a patchwork coat, arranged 2 small stones between the crosses. No one said much. Grief had been honored, but something new lingered, a softness. After a long while, Clara asked, "Is this where the baby sleeps?" Jonah knelt, nodding. Her name was Miriam. Clara placed a doll's ribbon on the stone. "She's got a sister now. I'll talk to her sometimes, so she don't get lonely." Hannah didn't cry. She'd cried enough for 2 lifetimes. Instead, she took Jonah's hand, and this time she didn't let go. They walked home together, past wind-bent fences, past barns in need of mending. But the door they returned to, it no longer creaked like sorrow. Inside, bread was rising, wood crackled. A quilt Jonah never used now lay across a bed meant for 2. That night, Clara asked to sleep in her own room, and so Jonah and Hannah stood in the hallway quiet. "She's choosing to stay," Hannah whispered. "So are we," Jonah said. Outside, a storm gathered in the far-off hills, but the ranch house glowed, steady windows warm. For the first time in years, there was no running, no hiding, only the holy, simple act of staying. And maybe that's what healing is. A quiet life, chosen together. Thank you for accompanying the story of Jonah Redden and Hannah Whitlow, 2 people who thought they had missed each other forever, but found their way back to each other through the eyes of a child and things that were never said out loud. There are wounds that don't need to be healed by explanations, but just need to be listened to in silence. There are doors that don't need to be knocked on, just stand in front of them long enough with a patient heart and open hands. In life, we may have lost someone or ourselves because of a mistake, a lack of courage. But as this story reminds us, if there is still a flickering light in the heart, if there is still someone gentle enough to linger, then hope still exists. If this story touches you, reminds you of an old person, an unfulfilled thing, or a secret wish in your heart, please share it with someone who also needs healing. And if you want to hear more gentle, profound stories about the revival of hearts that seem to have cooled down, subscribe to the channel, None Wild West Saga, so you don't miss any of the next episodes. Would you like to see a similar story or a sequel? Leave a comment below. We're always listening with all our hearts.